Welcome to the Silver Screen Guide podcast. Join Corbin and Allen, along with guest hosts, as they bring their love for the cinema to discuss films from every genre and decade. Learn about the history of the film, little-known facts, and insightful explorations while they enjoy discussing your favorite film. The curtain is rising and your podcast is starting, so sit back, relax, and enjoy your guide to the silver screen. Welcome back, listeners, to the 9th installment in our M. Night Shyamalan movie review series. Today we are reviewing Avatar, The Last Airbender, or more simply, The Last Airbender. This is your co-host, Corbin.
And I'm Allen.
And this is Shyamalan's actually first screenplay based on previous material. This is not one Shyamalan thought up himself, which is kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, it's interesting that Shyamalan now is moving into more Hollywood productions at this point. This will be, and we'll find out here in a second, his most expensive picture that he, I think, has ever done, and I think so far has ever done, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, the Shyamalan that we know has kind of changed a bit from more or less The Sixth Sense up until now. Because whereas The Sixth Sense in the first 3 movies, actually I would even say 4 movies, are rather adult in how they handle the PG-13 rating and its subject material, this one's very much the opposite, where it's very kid-centric and very family-driven.
To me, I'm thinking Shyamalan doesn't want to be typecast probably as simply a horror director or a suspense or thriller, the macabre, anything like that, especially right. Because his previous film was supposed to be kind of this 50s homage horror type film, The Happening, which you can listen to our review of, listeners. And of course, in the link in the description below, we will have all of our Shyamalan reviews up to this point, so there's still plenty of time to catch up. But last time Shyamalan's film was his very first R rating. And
That's
then
right.
He jumps to his second PG rating. And his first PG was Wide Awake, which came out way before, like 12 years before this. So right. I don't know. It's just an odd choice. Let's pick Shyamalan to adapt the smash hit Nickelodeon show. Right.
And what's funny too is before he made this movie, a little bit before he made this movie, he didn't actually know what Avatar: The Last Airbender was, the TV show. He found out about it because his daughter wanted to go as Katara for Halloween, and that's where he found out about it. And after that, it kind of became a big family thing for him and his family to sit down and watch the show. And then it wasn't long after that he decided to start working towards a motion picture with this, and he even went up to the 2 creators, Michael and Brian, and they even said that they were enthused to have Shyamalan come out and make this movie for them. Their only restriction was they just wanted to keep it PG. So it's interesting that the director decided that he wanted to do this. I guess maybe because of the power that he had, because of some of the movies that he's done before, this is probably what led to him getting the deal for this picture and actually having, actually being able to go along with it and be the director of it.
And in some ways, I guess, having a more kid-centric film is not surprising because all of his films, for the most part, have featured children prominently in some sort of important way. And he has shown he does want to go more so into the fantasy realm because with Lady in the Water, that started as a bedtime story that he created for his children. And I can see some of that growing out of it. Plus, I'm also thinking, if I'm Shyamalan, this is a way for me to get out of this pit I've dug myself in where everybody's kind of starting to hate my movies, whereas in the beginning, everybody loved them. And at the time, Avatar on TV was a huge hit with kids, and it still is very popular to this day with, on IMDb, a 9.2, making it the 13th greatest TV show of all time. So Shyamalan wanting to ride that wave and be the one to bring the big screen adaptation and everybody just love him again, I can see why he would pick the project.
Yeah, and even in the last movie with The Happening, he even stated that he he said in one of the special features, I'm Mr. PG-13, and that he also wanted to kind of break away from that, I guess, the label that he has on himself. And because with the happening, the studio also wanted a rated R picture. But this is also one, once again, another story of he is breaking away from the mold, which we've kind of been seeing the last few movies. He's breaking away from the movies that he is, I guess, most known for doing, more horror driven, a little bit more darker and a bit more adult, but still within the PG-13 realm. And now he's breaking away, doing something what before this was rated R and way outside of his comfort zone from what we've seen before. May not have been super great, but now we have the other way around, where it's very kid centric and it's aimed towards kids and families, not necessarily more adult driven. And so it's interesting to see this man trying to break away from that mode. And I've mentioned before in the last couple of podcasts that I'm on board to a certain degree with the change he's making. I like the change and how he doesn't want to stick with just one genre for his whole career.
And that is cool. That is something you honestly don't see a lot with most directors. They'll always kind of have a certain look and style to their films, usually, but usually a director kind of follows within the footsteps of the previous films that they've made before. The only director that's working today that I can think of that decided to break the mold with great success was Christopher Nolan. Once he took upon the Batman trilogy, of course, he really elevated a superhero film to a really high level, which I don't think we've really seen the likes of since. Right. But nevertheless, Shyamalan also is working with a different production company. He's working with Paramount this time. So he's making his rounds to all of the major studios, just one film after the other.
Right, because originally he began, after his first two movies, he started with Touchstone, which was owned by Disney, and then for Lady in the Water, he broke away from that and went with Warner Bros., and now he's with Paramount now. So he's kind of hopped around the big studios these last few years, trying to find, I guess, the studio to stay with, which most directors do. They usually find that one studio that they tend to stay with for a long time, if not their whole career. So he's been hopping around a bit. But luckily, Paramount does have a lot of money, and they were willing to give in about $250 million for what would become hopefully become a trilogy of movies. Now, that doesn't ever come to fruition, and we'll get into that here in just a second as to why that is. But yeah, Paramount was willing to shell in $250 million for a trilogy. Maybe Shyamalan would helm it. I don't really have explicit details on if he would be like the leader of this, but that is still a good amount of money that they were willing to give him, or at least start what would become a franchise.
Oh, absolutely. And my guess is $250 million, especially in 2010, that was a ton of money. But considering this film's budget was half of that, I'm guessing what they were probably going to do, if this was a smash hit, they're probably going to shoot the sequels back to back, which would have saved time and money and probably would have kept that budget around that 250 million mark. But did you also see who produced this film? I was really shocked to see Kathleen Kennedy's name and Frank Marshall produced this project. And for those of you who are thinking, wait, who are those people? Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall watch pretty much almost any Steven Spielberg movie. Yep. And they are on there producing with Spielberg. Currently, Kathleen Kennedy is in charge of Star Wars right now. So big names to also back this project.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Big names all the way around. And so at this point, I would say it's safe to say that Shyamalan has become fully engulfed by the Hollywood circle, more or less. However, actor-wise, this movie's a bit different, because usually with a big Hollywood production, you will have a few recognizable names in the cast. But this time it's a bit different. We have a lot of either newcomers or like not so well-known actors. So, for example, the actor of Aang, played by Noah Ringer, this is his first acting gig. I heard rumors going into this that he had sent in like an audition tape to Shyamallan, and that's how he got the role. I did look this up. That is kind of true. He more or less sent in the role because he he practiced Taekwondo. He's been doing it since he was 10 years old. And because he used to shave his head to keep his head cool off, he had been nicknamed Avatar. And so when he heard about this movie, he decided, to send in an audition tape to Shyamalan, and then Shyamalan gave him the role. Nicola Peltz also plays Katara in the movie, and this is also kind of like with Haley Joel Osment in The Sixth Sense. This is another role that Shyamalan just didn't want anybody else to play. She wanted that one person, in this case, Nicola Peltz, to play the role of Katara. And so, other than that, the role of Sokka was going to be played. The role of Zuko was first going to be played by who would eventually become Sokka. He sent an audition tape for that, but instead got the role of Sokka. So the cast here is interestingly unpopular considering the movie and the budget that we have.
Yeah, they are really unpopular, and they've mostly gone on to do almost nothing. I think that Katara, what's her name?
Katara.
Okay. Katara, I saw her when she was a little older in the first season of Bates Motel.
Right.
I know Jackson Rathbone from the Twilight series.
That's right, yeah.
I don't really know him from anything else. Aang, his name is Aang, but the movie called him Aang. I couldn't even tell you how frustrated I was when I first saw that in the theater.
Yeah.
Okay, Aang, I have no idea who he is. And, probably the most famous actor in this film is Dave Patel.
Right.
Who has gone on to very critical films, Oscar acclaim in the past few years. Lion, Life of Pi. He's very famous. His uncle is in Iron Man in the beginning.
I think you're right. Yeah,
he's the one in the cave, and one of the bad guys that they drown in a big ball of water towards the end. He's in a lot of stuff, but he's never like a really big name, kind of more so a comedic actor. So my thought is Shyamalan is he's really going different for this one, as we've been clearly stating. So he wants to do something with the cast. He wants to cast a lot of relative unknowns. I don't think he made the film feel any more authentic, because these people aren't really the correct ethnicity for their prospective roles anyway, which confused and frustrated a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But I'm kind of thinking of more recently, I heard Taika Waititi is going to be adapting Akira for Warner Brothers for live action. And he said he's going to cast a bunch of relative unknowns, a bunch of relative Japanese kids for this biker gang in Akira. So I don't know. I think some directors probably think they're being really smart when they do that, but you need people with acting abilities to make a good movie.
Right. And I mean, that's the thing that Star Wars does all the time. They always cast relatively unknown actors or actresses, and especially in these newer trilogies, or the newer trilogy, where
that's true.
They aren't really well known, but then after the movie comes out, they're almost cemented into just Hollywood culture. But going back to what you said earlier, where these kids aren't exactly the right ethnicity, yeah, there was quite a bit of controversy when this movie came out. It was being accused of whitewashing. Shyamalan did come out and say that's not, he doesn't really understand why people are so upset about it, because there are a lot of ethnicities being on display here in this movie. But it did, in fact, stir up a boycott, or call for a boycott from Media Action Network, which I guess hadn't done this kind of a thing for 18 years, according to Wikipedia. So this movie did get a bit of controversy when it first came out, which is also kind of interesting because, it's a kid's movie. But yeah, there was a boycott called on it, and Shyamalan didn't really understand what the problem was. So yeah, that was also a part of this history when it first was being released.
I guess their ethnicity doesn't really bother me. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And at times it does take me out of the film, because the Fire Nation is all the same ethnicity.
Yep.
But then the Water Tribe is, pretty much all white people. And then the Earth Tribe is all Asian people. And Aang is white, I guess. I don't know. It just feels wildly inconsistent.
Yeah.
With this world, and they're all supposed to be contained within like the same region of the hemisphere, yet they don't really look alike. So I don't know. It doesn't really bother me. It just seems a little strange.
Right. So let's get into budget. I mentioned this earlier. This is Shyamalan's most expensive, and I still think it is his most expensive overall picture that he's ever done. $150 million for the budget. Now, there were marketing numbers for this one. Usually you don't see them spit out the marketing numbers, but marketing for this was $120 million. We talked about marketing in, what podcast was it? A few podcasts ago, where we mentioned, it was Men in Black International. That's what it was, where we found out that the marketing for that was $150 million, and that was relatively lowball compared to what most pictures of the same caliber end up coming to. So $120 million for marketing, which is still really good. I know they had like they had a pretty big action figure push along with costumes and things like that. So total $270 million for this picture, which is over what they were going to give to the whole trilogy, what will hopefully will become a trilogy if they had gone that far with it. Now, again, that wasn't including marketing. That was probably just budget itself.
Yeah, that's crazy numbers for
Shyamalan,
considering his last budget, if I'm not mistaken, was in the 40s, and it had a terrible gross. But this film did gross far better than his previous films.
Right. Yeah. So it opened on July 1st, 2010. It came in with an opening weekend of $40.3 million, which is not great for an opening weekend. But it did domestically get $131.7 million. Foreign market at $187.9 million for a worldwide total of $319.7 million. So it did pretty all right in the box office. It's probably still considered a flop by Paramount standards, but it did make some pretty good money nonetheless, especially compared to what Shyamalan has pulled in before and how much budget he was given.
Yeah, I'm sure Paramount was disappointed because this film, due to the success among children and with their parents and even teenagers, this film should have done way better than 40 million opening weekend, and it should have done far better worldwide. These were fairly low numbers domestically and foreign. I understand opening weekend it was beat out by Twilight Eclipse because that Twilight train is just going too fast to stop.
Yeah,
but it did come in above Toy Story 3, which had been out for a while, Grown Ups, and Night and Day. Nevertheless, this movie should have gave Twilight a closer run for its money and just done better overall.
Oh yeah, no, it absolutely should have. And in some ways, it's surprising that it didn't. But I would like to guess that the controversy that came out before it was released with the whitewashing may have had something to do with these numbers. That's just my guess. I think it's a pretty good guess. But yeah, you're right. It came out when it came out, it was at number 2. And then for the next week, it went down to number 3, with Eclipse still at number 1. Toy Story 3 went back up to number 2. And then for week, I guess 4, I have in here. That might be week 3. But it went down to number 7 when Despicable Me came out. And around this time, too, you had Despicable Me, Sorcerer's Apprentice, and Toy Story 3, all of which are kids' movies coming out around the same time. Toy Story 3 is probably the oldest one in this bunch that's been out the longest at this point. But you do have a lot of competition here, with a lot more kids' movies, a lot more PG films being released roughly the same time in the summer.
And I was definitely there opening weekend. I went with a mutual friend of ours. I remember being very excited for this film. I only remember seeing one teaser trailer, and that of Aang whipping his staff around, kind of blowing out the candles and relighting them. And then it cuts to like the big Fire Nation ships kind of shooting their fireballs. That's the only real marketing I remember for this film. But nevertheless, I was excited. I honestly don't remember if I saw it in 3D or not. I very well might have saw it in 3D. I think I was mainly disappointed because the names are said differently. Yep. And that really kind of, I'm like, this isn't the Avatar I remember. Right. It didn't quite have the excitement and the grip of the TV show, which I had really enjoyed. I don't believe I ever got to see the entirety of the television show. Have you, Alan?
I have seen good chunks of it. I know I've seen pretty much the entire first season I think that one also may have been in chunks. But I know I've seen pretty much all the first season, and then bits and pieces of 2 and 3. So not all the way through. I haven't seen all the episodes, but I've seen a good chunk of them. But it also has been a few years. So my memory in the first season is relatively intact, but for the next 2 seasons, which we don't ever get into in this movie, it's relatively contained to the first season. My memory for those is pretty spotty.
So did audiences and critics like this one? Were they pretty excited and glad about the movie?
Not really. This is so far Shyamalan's lowest rated movie almost all across the board.
Yeah.
IMDb 4.1, which last week was I think a straight 5.0.
It was,
which is really bad.
Yep.
Metascore 20. Rotten Tomatoes 5% critic score and a 30% audience score, and Letterboxd with a 1.2. However, CinemaScore surprisingly is higher than last week, which was at a D. This week is at a C. Still not great, but is above what we saw last week.
Yeah, and even the audience score for Rotten Tomatoes is 6% higher than last week's film. Mm-hmm. So I guess you could say audiences did like this film better than The Happening, except critics hated it way more. And IMDb is more so kind of a testament to time, like how well it's aged over time. And so as of right now, that 4.1 is just an abysmal score.
That's a really, really bad score. It's unfortunately bad is what it is, considering the director that we've seen before here.
And last time The Happening was nominated for a couple Razzies. This time, this film swept the Razzies.
Oh yeah, it did. It had 9 nominations at the Razzies, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, and it won 5 of them, including Worst Picture. And I thought one of the Razzies was really funny. It's Worst On-Screen Couple, and for that, the entire cast was nominated.
Oh, that's funny.
Just the entire cast.
Oh, that's funny.
So you can tell listeners, this film is pretty much hated. It is hated. But do we hate it? I think that's the big question. We're coming back to this film. It's been almost 10 years. So maybe it's aged better. I know at the time I read Roger Ebert's review and he said that the 3D was awful. The 3D made the film look dark and gritty and grimy, and it was pretty much unwatchable. Whereas I watched this in my theater room. I wanted to get the closest theatrical experience that I could get. And from my look, I didn't see any dark grittiness. We'll talk about it here during the review, but from my viewing, I thought the film actually looked really good, especially for a 10-year-old film.
Oh yeah. I watched it on a 55-inch TV in my basement, but I did have surround sound, so that's nice. Yeah, it looked fine.
All right, listeners, if you haven't seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I guess we did forget to mention that this film, I believe it was originally released as Avatar: The Last Airbender in certain like marketing promotionals, possibly even its first week of release. They might have dropped that title before then, but I know that did actually cause a lot of confusion naming the film Avatar, because not that many months prior, just the year before, James Cameron's Avatar, the biggest film of all time,
not anymore.
That did kind of cause some confusion. So I thought they would want to keep the title to hopefully like increase their box office numbers, but they just dropped it. So sometimes you'll see it as Avatar: The Last Airbender, and sometimes you'll see it as just The Last Airbender.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess it's time for a plot summary.
That's right. So if you haven't seen The Last Airbender, go to Amazon Prime right now. Unless you don't have it, then go rent it anywhere you please. Go ahead and watch the film. Come back and click play here on the podcast, and we will be ready to talk about it.
Okay, so for those who have seen the show, this is going to be kind of nothing new. This movie is basically highlights from season 1 of the TV show. So here we go. 100 years have passed since the Fire Nation began making efforts to control the whole world. The Avatar, someone who can bend all 4 elements and is meant to keep peace with the world, has vanished, leaving the world unbalanced. One day, siblings Katara, played by Nicola Peltz, and Sokka, played by Jackass and Rathbone, who are both a part of the Southern Water Tribe, discover something in the ice. Katara decides that she better dig for it, and up comes the Avatar, named Aang, played by Noah Ringer, enclosed in a ball of ice with his trusty flying bison, Appa. A beam of light shoots out into the sky when the ice cracks, leading the exiled Fire Nation prince, Zuko, played by Dave Patel, to follow it. He arrives at the tribe and forcefully takes Aang aboard his ship. Katara and Sokka feel a responsibility for this kid and follow after him, riding on Appa. Aang escapes Zuko and hops aboard his flying bison with his new friends as they head towards the Southern Air Temple. There, Aang finds that he really was encased in that ice for 100 years, and that no one is there to meet him except for the bones of his friends and teachers. Aang and friends then head to the Earth Temple and find a bunch of Earthbenders enslaved by the Fire Nation. Aang and Katara empower the captives to rise up and break free, which they do, and our posse of heroes journeys forward. Aang's path is set. He must master the other 3 elements to become the Avatar. The gang then heads towards the Northern Air Temple, where Aang is set up and then taken captive by Commander Zhao. However, a masked man called the Blue Spirit breaks Aang out. The Blue Spirit turns out to be Zuko. Aang returns to Sokka and Katara as they finally arrive at the Northern Water Tribe. Commander Zhao catches the wind that the Avatar is headed north and grabs his fleet of warships. Zuko tries kidnapping Aang again, but is no match. Zhao is here and he grabs the Moon Spirit in a bag and kills it, causing unbalance once again. Sokka's new girlfriend takes a dip and reincarnates as a fish. Aang jumps up on a wall and enters the Avatar state to create a big wave to stop the Fire Nation, and everyone wins. The Fire Lord learns of the loss of the Northern Water Tribe and sends Zuko's sister Azula after Aang as credits roll. Okay. Did you get all that?
Yes, I got all of it, and Shyamalan, as you said, decided to watch the TV show, and then he said, okay, I'm going to not be creative whatsoever. I am just like last time, got really sloppy with that last script, and he literally, like you said, took highlights from the first season. This is the first season of the TV show condensed into 90 minutes, which is ridiculous because I don't know how long the first season is, but it's probably around 20 episodes or so. And if you peg that at maybe a little over 20 minutes, I mean, you're looking at 400 minutes worth, which is, I don't know, like 5.5 hours.
A lot of minutes
of a story, and you're cutting that into a tiny slice of the pie. So I don't want to be negative right off the bat, but I'll already say it that the storytelling has significant issues because instead of just telling a story, they're trying to hit the highlights.
Right. So some good things before I guess I could probably say just rip into it.
Sort of.
Okay. The set design. Honestly, really good set design, which is surprising because the last time the set design was pretty much filmed on the urban outsets of Philadelphia. Rural outsets of Philadelphia. Here, they actually go outside of Philadelphia for, I think, the first time almost for a long time since Shyamalan started making movies. And the set design, it looks really good. This film, despite its quality in total, looks really good.
Oh yeah, the film does look really good. And I'll even say the CGI has aged very well for the most part. I really found the CGI to be mostly believable, and I was very impressed with it. And yeah, the set design, the outdoor locations, and even the green screen lots. I really like the world and the environment that they create. And I guess it's utilized fairly well for the most part. I guess I was fairly impressed with it, actually. Yeah. So that's kind of where my compliments end with the film. That's literally all I've got. Was it looks good. Probably my favorite aspect, honestly, was the CGI. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the action was filmed very well. I don't think Shyamalan quite knows how to build tension and give a solid payoff. Because, for instance, when we have this 300 style fight with the Blue Spirit and Aang, and they're fighting all of those people in slow-mo, which I'm like, okay, you're pulling off Zack Snyder's 300 here. And then they escape over that bridge. And I'm like, this is going to be awesome. The Avatar is just going to like fly off and do some cool move. No, he just brings fog in over the bridge.
Yep.
and they're gone. I'm like, that killed it. Dang it. That's anticlimactic. So a lot of this ends in very quiet, anticlimactic stuff, which maybe that's what they're going for with this kind of like peaceful Hinduistic worldview. I don't know.
Right. And I kind of agree with you. And I'll even say the action scenes are part of the reason what kept me in this movie. I'll be honest, it was around the Blue Spirit scene. I was really looking at that remote and thinking, man, that stop button looks really enticing right now. But once this scene came about, it kind of grabbed me back into the movie. Now, it's not fantastic. It's not a great scene, but it was enough to keep me invested in the movie till at least the very end. So I'll say this, the action scenes are nice. The choreography, I think, is really good. Especially pretty much every time there's any kind of bending going on, it looks pretty cool in terms of its choreography. And yeah, the CGI does look very nice. I think it is kind of spotty in some parts. Like anytime they use like an animal, CGI on an animal doesn't look all that great. But the effects when it comes to bending look really, really good. And that's because Industrial Light and Magic did the CGI for this movie. So of course it's top notch. So yeah, those are a couple more, I guess, positives I can give for this movie. Music, once again, is fine. James Newton Howard returns for the score again, and he, as always, does a fine job.
I couldn't help but think James Newton Howard took a lot of cues from John Williams' Star Wars score, because I was constantly thinking this sounds a lot like Star Wars during action scenes or any other scenes. I think he utilizes probably a lot of horns or trumpets in certain sections. Yeah, he does. I don't know. I know that his score was apparently very well received and praised, which probably was the only real standout aside from, as you said, the visual effects. Yeah. But I was actually a little disappointed because I didn't honestly feel like the score went very well with this movie. I think I would like something more that we saw in like a Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or some kind of, Japanese foreign film that really utilizes like the wires and the kung fu a lot better than this.
Yeah, I will agree with you that the score, although I give it a positive, I do say that I don't think it completely fits with the movie 100%. The score in the show and the score in the movie are very different, obviously. But I still think James Newton Howard does a fine job here. If you listen to the score outside of the movie, it does sound fine. And it's James Newton Howard. You know, he knows what he's doing. But yeah, it's nothing that I would consider to be fantastic, but I do think it is good.
And it was kind of funny because I was reading a critic's review and they basically said this is Star Wars set in ancient Japan almost. And there is a lot of similarities to that, I would say. Kind of finding the chosen one. And of course, this film draws heavily on Hinduistic writings of literally the Avatar, and overall just kind of more of a messianic theme of Aang is clearly the Messiah of this world. He is the last one. And even though I've seen the show, I guess I was kind of confused for all of the absurd exposition that they spoon feed us in the beginning of the film. I didn't even find it sufficient to understanding. So there's only one Avatar, but there's multiple airbenders.
So airbenders are not necessarily going to be the Avatar. The Avatar is just a person that the role is more or less passed on to after the last Avatar either is dying or does die.
Reincarnation.
So pretty much, yeah. It's essentially reincarnation of the Avatar, but the person won't really know it until a bit later in life. Right. In this case, Aang. In the TV show, he does talk to Avatar Roku, I think is his name, where he mostly has visions of Avatar Roku talking to him, and that does kind of help him on his journey. Now, that never happens in the movie. That's just in the show. One thing they kind of skipped over. So, yeah, it is more of a reincarnation kind of a thing when it comes to the Avatar in the Avatar lore, but that's not explained in the movie. That's more explored in the TV show.
I couldn't even believe how much they were giving us exposition, though, when the two children, Katara and what's his name? Osako or something?
Sako,
okay. I don't know. These characters are so forgettable, but they're talking to their grandma who just gives them the go ahead to go with them without blink of an eye. But she's like, Grandma, what is this? Or what is that? And I'm like, thanks, narrator. Thanks. That is just so poor storytelling to just have children sit down and then they ask questions the audience is wondering about. But apparently, as the years go on, Shyamalan continually forgets how to write a story. And he just resorts to just exposition dumps.
Right.
And so we spend too much time on exposition dumps, and then he realizes we have to catch up with the train because it's leaving the station. So then we just have really clunky edits and really clunky jump into story beats. I know you were saying how bad I believe you were saying the editing was really bad in the last film.
Yep.
I would say it's pretty much on par with this film as well. Maybe this one's worse with trying to keep up with what's going on.
I think part of that reason too is, and there's a quote that Shyamalan had, and he addressed the 90 minutes runtime of this movie and how people, pretty much everyone, was like, this is way too short and you're condensing way too much to tell a story from a TV show that's a season long. And he addressed it and he basically said that his mind, because of all the other movies that he's done up until this point, have been around that 90-minute mark. And so his mind keeps him kind of stuck on 90 minutes is about the perfect length. And he says he does this because every other movie he's done is relatively small scale, whereas this one is almost the complete opposite. It's very large scale. So he in his mind is thinking, okay, this needs to be 90 minutes in order to correctly tell the story and pace it out correctly. But instead it backfires because you have a lot of chunks just completely missing of them taking time in one area and have it be something that's meaningful. Instead, we chop it up so it keeps around on. I think the total runtime is like an hour 41, which is still kind of long for Shyamalan. But because of that, you have very, very poor storytelling because the editing is just so bad. You jump around. Then literally in the first hour, like 10 minutes or so, we jump around so much that every place we spend is just like, okay, well, whatever, because we move on from it. And we never talk about it, and it's never referenced ever again and has no impact.
Yeah, it doesn't have any impact. And clearly they're also trying to plant seeds because they're dead sure this is going to be part one of a trilogy.
Oh, yeah.
So who cares if we, like you said, skip around so much and don't come back to these people, because we're going to come back to the little boy in the Earth Village that's getting chased around. And Aang gives this awful speech trying to rally the troops.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Then they just leave the Earth Village people or something. And the amount of subtitles we got on the screen of Northern Earth Kingdom, Southern Air Temple, it was like one every 5 minutes almost.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't follow it. And at that point, I became disengaged because I was actually going with this movie. Clearly, there's a lot of acting issues. But I was going with the movie until eventually I thought, what is the point of all this? Like you said, like, who cares? Like, where's our goal and destination? And right. I'm still not even sure why they go to the Northern Water Temple. Like, I feel like we're talking about a Zelda video game here. They go there and it has something to do with the water spirits. I don't know. But yeah, a lot of pacing issues.
Oh, yeah. This is probably, in my mind, Shyamalan's worstly. It's a movie that has the worst pacing. That every movie that he's made has had better pacing than this movie. This movie has abysmal pacing, and that's because it has abysmal editing. It's even disjointed too because the first hour goes by so fast, and then once we get to the Northern Water Tribe or whatever, then it just slows down and actually starts explaining things, kind of, and actually gives us time to even develop somewhat of an understanding and relationship with the Northern Tribe here before the Fire Nation attacks, and tries to build some kind of emotional attachment. It's so disjointed. The editing here is so disjointed. And I was in it until I think it was right around the time that Aang was forcefully taken on board by Zuko onto his ship, because that happens just so fast. And once he gets onto the ship, That's already episode, I think, 2 of this of the show. 2 or I think it's like episode 2 of the show when he's aboard his ship and then escapes. And so things are just flying by, and we're missing a lot of things, a lot of detail and a lot of substance to make these stops that we have meaningful. Because in the show, they have a whole episode dedicated to a lot of these segments, which takes a lot of time to build emotional attachment and understand why we're here. The movie, though, because it's so poorly edited and so poorly paced, we don't get that.
And I thought when we did first meet Zuko, Dave Patel's performance was it was either melodramatic or at the same time over the top. I thought it was incredibly ridiculous, which of course translates to animation far easier because they're literally cartoon characters, whereas these are people trying to emulate cartoon characters, which usually doesn't work very well. So these characters are really unbelievable. And at the same time, I'm not even sure I necessarily blame all of these actors. I'm thinking a lot of the blame rests at Shyamalan's feet, because Shyamalan has already, from The Sixth Sense pretty much onward, has worked with always A-list, very seasoned actors in all of his movies that really probably don't need a lot of direction. It's just incredible how he's been able to get top-notch talent. And really, how could he give them a lot of direction? Because they know what they're doing, and he hasn't been a director for that long. So he probably hasn't had a lot of opportunities to actually direct people. I don't know this for certain. I could be wrong. He could have been working his bahookie off to try and get these people to exhibit more realistic emotions and not just kind of give these blasé pleas all the time. But I don't think it's necessarily their fault. I'm thinking Shyamalan doesn't really know how to direct them very well. And then at the same time, Shyamalan doesn't necessarily know how to, he's kind of torn between a massive fantasy world building film and trying to maintain these kind of intimate character driven moments that pretty much all of his preceding films have been about. Shyamalan's never written a massive a film within a huge scope, like Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings. They've always been very intimate character studies for the most part.
Right. And I think the other part too, and this is kind of coming from what I picked up on the interviews and stuff. Shyamalan is not in his prime. This is not where he wants to be. And this is not necessarily a place where the most of his filmmaking and the best parts of his filmmaking come out. He's mentioned this. I mentioned a quote earlier where he wanted to get down to 90 minutes. And he does another quote that he says that he just fell into this trap, more or less, of the Hollywood circle and is dealing with big budget movies which is not where he wants to be. He wants to be in more small scale, lower budget movies. And that's why he finances his movies now, is partly because of this movie. And so that's my guess too, is that he's just in a place after running off of the success of his previous movies, he's at a place now where he doesn't really, at a place where he shouldn't be because of how he actually makes films. He's in a different place where he's having to deal with an actual big name studio to help direct this picture. He has a lot of money at his feet. So I wonder if that's also part of it too, is that he's trying to stay within himself, trying to stay with, okay, this is what I'm used to, keeping things 90 minutes to small scale, while also dealing with a picture that's very large scale, and that must be like closer to 2 hours, if not much longer than that, to tell the story correctly.
And you're absolutely right, which further begs the question, why did they even pick Shyamalan to write this film? First of all, I know Shyamalan always has to say written, produced, and directed by M. Night Shyamalan. Okay, but put that bit of ego aside, they needed to have different writers or creative consultants. And from what I understand, the original creators prefer to think this film doesn't exist, and they felt they weren't well consulted on this film.
Right. Now, I know that in the beginning, I think I mentioned this, the creators were totally on board for Shyamalan to get in and start making this movie. But yeah, they have since kind of retracted that. And I think, once again, that's just because of Shyamalan's name. Because he, at this point, even though he is up until this point, his movies are being kind of inconsistent with the last few, but he's still made very high quality movies before. So they were wondering if maybe he would be able to take justice or do justice for their story of Avatar: The Last Airbender in a live action form, in about feature length format. Obviously, that's not what happens here. So that's just my guess, is given Shyamalan's fame that he's gotten up to this point, and that he wasn't really where he needs to be, where in his prime, I think we're having an imbalance issue, which is funny because we deals a lot with a lot of unbalance in nature in the film. That's also happening outside the movie, where Shyamalan doesn't really want to be here, but he just doesn't know it at the time until after the movie's made and after everyone has after the critics just rip it to shreds.
Yeah, and speaking of imbalanced, is sometimes I think this film has some really great cinematography, and then other times it feels just very cheap or run of the mill. So I don't know what direction was given behind the camera, but I was thinking specifically of the scene where Aang is given up. He's been betrayed by one of the monks in I think it's like the Northern Air Temple or the Southern Air Temple, I don't know.
Yeah.
And when all those arrows come through and you see all of the Fire Nation soldiers running in, and it's just that shot of the horrified looking monk slowly backing away, I'm like, that is a shot that I could see. The film hadn't come out yet, but that's the kind of shot that Christopher Nolan would use in like The Dark Knight Rises, for instance, when he's down in the pits or whatever, when Bruce Wayne is. I'm like, dang, that is a really good shot. And that does not fit within this movie. The caliber of the film, I'm like, that's kind of a real great moment of genius there behind the camera, but we really don't ever get that again.
Right. And I mean, there are also sequences too where, like, and we mentioned this earlier, I think you did actually, with the Earthbenders. There's this scene where it's just this super long take.
Yep.
And there really isn't a good reason for it to be super long, I guess. There's a few long takes in this movie, but this is probably the best example of it, where the shot just goes on for a long time and you do get to see somewhat in real time, Aang and friends show up. Then they empower the people and they overthrow the Fire Nation that's enslaved them. It's weird. It doesn't really fit. That's another shot that doesn't really fit within the movie, within the context, because it goes on for a long time, but there aren't a lot of sequences that do that, where there's a lot of sweeping shots and it's a lot of moving camera when it comes to these action scenes, or at least this scene alone in particular, that is more of an uprising.
Yeah, before we give our final thoughts, I also am disappointed with how the climax is handled, because it feels far too muddled, because we're focusing on way too many characters.
Oh, yeah.
And particularly, I think what was wildly unnecessary and head-scratching, I did actually fall asleep during this part, but I rewound it, don't worry, so I know what I'm talking about. Okay, so they constantly are focusing on the yin and yang fish.
Yep.
And then Aang is also having to meditate, go into the spirit world to talk to the giant dragon. And there's this barely there subplot of Sokko and the princess and her life. And then, of course, we have to deal with Zuko and his uncle. And then the general that supposedly had Zuko assassinated, and it becomes so incredibly muddled, and the moon turns red and they capture him in a water ball. It's just like, what's going on? You clearly have no idea how to focus on characters during this sequence and make it even coherent. And what's going on? And giant Gila monsters, like lizards? What?
Yeah, the show does a really good job at explaining this entire mess, because it takes 2 episodes to get to this climax, just to explain things and get it to a point where it's serviceable and actually works. Unfortunately, in the movie, they condensed that, into about 20 minutes worth of screen time. And yeah, literally the entire subplot of Sokka and the princess, or whatever her name is just explained to us through Katara, who essentially only does that throughout this entire movie. Is
and
just
not well.
No, all she does is just explain things to us. And then Sokka's the other way around, where all he does is nag. The only thing he does in this movie is nag Katara not to do this, not to do that. He does nothing else, which is totally backwards from his character in the story or in the TV show, because he's mostly the comic relief in the TV show, whereas in the movie that is completely stripped out, and he is always very serious and always has to nag about everything in every scene. And so his character is just kind of reduced to essentially nothing, and could have been completely written out of this movie and nothing would have changed.
I can't think of one thing that he does that's really pivotal to the plot. And every character should have their moment to say, I'm here for a reason.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. I guess the princess does, because she gives her life so the moon won't be red again. But once again, cut. Don't even include the guy stabbing the yang fish and the world going out of balance. It's totally unnecessary and completely distracting from this. Not to mention, I hate it in first installments when they go do their quote Battle of Helm's Deep, where it's kind of their big budget battle that has a lot of things riding on it. We're not there yet. Oh, no. We most recently saw this, I would say, with the movie Mortal Engines, which feels like Lord of the Rings 1, 2, and 3 all in, 90, 100-minute film. And it's like, no. You clearly have run out of things to tell in your story if you're jumping to like the climax of the saga, right? Which is what I feel this is.
Right. And part of that too is because this is, in my mind, the only sequence in the entire movie where I feel we actually take some time, not a lot of time, but some time to explain where we're at, why we're here, and try to develop some kind of emotional depth. Now, it doesn't do it very well, but that is something that is in this entire sequence of them at the Northern Water Tribe. They do slow down to a point where it's somewhat digestible, considering the rest of the movie that we have here. So I'll give Shyamallan that. At least the ending has a little bit more emotional stakes to it than the rest of the movie. But once again, it's not like it does it very well anyways, because it just makes no sense, or at least they don't explain it very well as to why these things are happening. Why Commander Zhao has got to stab the fish. Why why the blood moon comes out. Why the princess has to sacrifice her life. That's all explained very well in the show, but when it comes to the movie, they spend no time on that, and so it's just like, okay, well, whatever. This is a movie, I guess, when I was watching it at least.
Yeah, not to mention we don't have any attachment to any of these characters.
Oh, no.
So I can't even remember their names because they've been on screen for all of 2.5 minutes. And the other thing is, you're right, they do slow down at this portion, but unfortunately, I don't think there's enough character moments. It's like you said, it's either monologuing from Katara or what I found to be fairly boring kind of Tai Chi movements that didn't really have much explanation to them. I guess they're just practicing, and I guess you have to make certain movements in order to bend certain elements of the earth. Once again, totally not explained. It's just something you got to memorize, I guess, and you can do it. I guess it's kind of like the Force. In a way, I've felt a little bit of that, which Star Wars takes a lot from Hinduism as well, but that's a discussion for a totally separate time. But anyways, Shyamalan doesn't really give us those. He gives us a breath, but I think he needed to implement more character moments, more dialogue between the characters instead of just these really silent Tai Chi movements. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. There needed, with a show that's really character centric, it's kind of a slap in the face when you have a movie like this that's kind of the opposite, where you spend so little time with every single character. They're essentially, like in Sokka's case, completely rendered useless. Yeah, and my other problem is we are watching this film within the context, within the scope of just a single installment, and we will never, as far as I know, we will never have, unless, surprise, next year Shyamalan's coming back with Avatar 2. The second Airbender. Right. But we're seeing the story we're only seeing a third of the story. We are never seeing the full story. So that alone makes the film really hard to care about and be invested in and to even think about. And maybe if this was a completed trilogy, then I would be more okay with this film, because that would clearly alter my view of these characters, because we would have spent episodes 2 and 3 with them and not just episode 1. But we're never going to get that. So that as well is a real kind of black mark, I would say, on the film.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Alan, I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but let's talk about it anyways. What is your rating and recommendation for Avatar: The Last Airbender?
It was no surprise what I was getting myself into this time around. Kind of like that happening, but this is a little bit different because this is a brand new. I've not seen this movie before outside of the TV show, but I already knew kind of what I was going to get myself into. And aside from the good set design and the good music and the pretty good action scenes and the martial arts and the choreography that's on display here, this movie is kind of really bad. That's because, and I think mostly this movie has most of its issues. Not all of it, but a lot of its issues stem because of the editing. The editing here is really bad. This is some of the worst editing I've seen from Shyamalan in all of his movies, including the first 2. And that's because he takes a TV show that's 20 or however many episodes long, however many hours long, and then condenses it down to an hour in roughly 40 minutes of screen time. That's not enough time to correctly build up relationships, get through all the important moments that they need to build the story, and have a satisfying conclusion. That's not enough time for almost any movie of this caliber. They need more time. This needs to be closer to 2.5, if not 2 hours and 45 minutes in order to really grasp what this show is all about in a movie format. A lot of characters, I mentioned this earlier, a lot of characters are kind of just squashed down to almost either shells of the character they were in the show, or they were completely useless. Katara, all she does is just spill exposition. Sokka, on the other hand, all he does is nag. It's just, what this is just a highlight reel. That's all it is. It's a highlight reel of the greatest hits of the show. It's like a high-quality fan-made highlight reel of the show. So, no, it's not good. And no, I can't recommend it. But because of some of the positives that are there, I will give it a 2 out of 10. But it's only because of those positives. Otherwise, this would have been a straight 1 out of 10. So, yeah, 2 out of 10, not recommend.
The Last Airbender is a sloppy rehashing of the first season of the beloved TV series. Shyamalan provides poor direction to his cast, so they come across as cheesy, uninteresting, and at times melodramatic. Giving us a Cliff Notes version of the first season doesn't make for an exciting story, but rather a soulless, muddled copy and paste with a bit of excising. I'm sad to say this because initially the film really did have potential, but after the first act, the plot becomes so disjointed, it becomes hard to follow, and there's nothing here to give a reason to care. Also, clearly making this film a part 1 instead of a standalone story greatly diminishes any rewatchability. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a bad film, it's just not a good one. Yes, it is watchable and a significant step up from Shyamalan's previous 2 entries. The Last Airbender receives 5 stars out of 10 with a mild not recommend.
So the question becomes, where do we go from here? Obviously, there's not going to be another 2 sequels. But
as far as we know,
yes. There have been people have asked about it, and they said the general question is, I don't know, from everyone that they've asked that's been connected to this movie. But Netflix is coming out with a live action show for Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, this will be completely disconnected from what we see here. This is only completely on its own. It's completely in-house by Netflix. But there will be more Airbender for your Airbender enjoyment. It's just not going to be with Shyamallan. As far as that's all the deals that have been released, it won't be with Shyamallan. It's just a completely own thing. It's not going to be anything. There are so far no sequels planned for what we see here. Probably ever for what we see here. But could happen. We'll see, I guess, in the future.
Yeah, from what I understand, the possibility for a sequel. So Paramount was like, let's test the waters because we gave you a ton of money writing on this film.
Yeah.
Let's test the waters and see how well it does at the box office. And yeah, it did okay, but because it had that really poor audience and critics reaction, from what I understand, it wasn't like this big thing like, no, we're not going to put a sequel out. Paramount just kind of like let it all just slide into the oblivion, like pretending this movie kind of never happened. And they just got dead quiet on it whenever Avatar 2 was brought up. But I did read as late as 2015, 5 years after the release of this film, which would be 4 years ago. In 2015, Shyamalan said he was going to possibly develop a sequel.
Right.
So, but then that's absolutely not going to happen. Clearly, Shyamalan did develop a sequel to one of his previous films, just not this. We're not going to talk about that just quite yet. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was a year ago to the month that the creators of the original show said they were partnering with Netflix to create a live action remake of their TV show. And if I was to guess, we would probably, I bet it'll drop on Netflix probably a year from now.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably a safe bet. It'd be interesting to see what the live action rendition would look like. I don't know if it's necessary for them to be continuing the Avatar stuff. I think the TV show suffices, and it was just released on Blu-ray. But hey, I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see what happens when it releases on Netflix here in a little bit.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Netflix's live action track record with adapting animes isn't a strong one. The last time I remember was Death Note, which I absolutely adore, the anime. And the film was a very poor imitation. Yeah, it was bad. Let's just say it. Let's just say it was bad. So I guess I have hope because the original creators are coming on board, but then at the same time, it's just like, why? Like, I don't get it. But Netflix did have a lot of success, I would say, with the fantasy redo of The Dark Crystal, which I highly recommend, listeners. Please go watch that. I love that show. That is incredible fantasy world building. So this is what we need for the Avatar. Clearly, it's a big, rich world, and it needs lots of time to breathe. So I'm curious, and Netflix has kind of been on a roll lately. They're also adapting The Witcher into live action, which comes out, I think, this Christmas. That looks really good as well. So we'll see. But as for what Shyamalan has in store, Shayamalan is going science fiction?
Yeah, he's going for After Earth with father-son duo of Will Smith and Jaden Smith for After Earth.
Yeah, I don't know a thing about that movie. I have never seen it, and I've never seen a trailer, so it'll be completely brand new to me.
The only thing I've seen from it is, I think, a scene or a chunk of it, but I have not watched it all the way through. All I know is people consider it to be boring, apparently. So I guess we'll find out. Okay,
well, I'm going to be honest, listeners. I'm kind of setting my hopes up for the next one. I'm thinking it might be better than I think it is going to be. So I'm fingers crossed.
Yeah, I'm curious. I actually haven't seen it all the way through, so I'm just curious to see what my thoughts are going to be watching it all the way through for the first time. Because like I said, only seen about small chunks of it.
All right, Alan, thank you so much for joining me.
Sure thing.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us, and we will see you next week after Earth. Hey listeners, it's Corbin. Don't forget to check out the exciting links in the description below that will connect you with more great movie reviews for your listening pleasure, and our YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter page, and of course our official website where you can read great articles and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Also, if you want exclusive bonus content such as extra movie reviews, movie commentaries, and our thoughts on the latest movie news and trailers, plus more, then check out our Patreon page. It's a great way to help keep this show free, and it gives you great content that's yours to keep. All of that and more is found in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe whether you're on YouTube, Apple, Google, or Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. And while you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review so other movie lovers can more easily find our podcast. We love talking about movies, and we love talking about them with you. So don't forget to share with your friends and family, and we'll see you next week, listeners. The Silver Screen Guide podcast is edited and produced by Alan and Corbin. Intro and outro music is created by Thomas Rankin. The thoughts and opinions herein expressed are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent those held by Silver Screen Guide. Silver Screen Guide is not affiliated with any company or individual involved with the creation of this movie or TV show. No portion of the podcast may be used without express written permission from Silver Screen Guide.